Welcome to the Public Library of Mount Vernon and Knox County's first event for Banned Books Week in 2022. We are pleased to present this program in concert with PEN America, our community partners in advocating for freedom of expression and the right to read. Today, we are hosting an online community book discussion of Ray Bradbury's classic novel, Fahrenheit 451, with Banned Books Week co-chairs, Alyssa Lawrence and Debbie Chambers. So welcome everybody. And I see people are putting their names and hometowns in the chat, and I love seeing all of you here with us. Before we get going, I want to introduce our two fabulous library interns. Janine is here with us and Leah is here with us. The library understands that Banned Books Week and censorship are really exciting topics, but we also seek to maintain a respectful conversation in our discourse today. So we use the Conversation Cafe guidelines for these discussions. And here's what this requires of us, and Leah will post it in the chat so that for those of you who are following along, if you prefer to read, there it is. We ask that you keep an open mind, listen and respect all points of view, that you suspend judgment as best you can, curiosity, seek to understand rather than to persuade, discovery, that you question assumptions and look for new insights, that you are sincere, speak from your heart and your personal experience, and also brevity, that you go for honesty and depth, but that you don't go on and on. And with that, I will turn things back over to Leah.
Okay. Debbie is a children's books writer, a global health researcher, professor, and a health administration promoter. She actively volunteers on the engagement and mentoring committees at APHA Health Administration section. Ms. Chambers earned a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from Daystar University in Kenya, a Master of Public Health, and a Master of Healthcare Administration from National University in San Diego, California. Ms. Chambers is pursuing a doctorate in health administration at North Central University in San Diego, California. She is interested in advocacy issues in PEN America, particularly in joining and championing causes that enhance a literary culture by building cultural bridges that merge diversity, equity, and inclusion with free expression.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Janine, the other intern. I have the privilege today to introduce Alyssa. Alyssa was born and raised in Knox County and graduated from Kenyon College as an English major. She lived in North Carolina and Columbus before returning to Knox County to take the opportunity to grow Kenyon's Office for Community Partnerships in January 2016. Her work focuses on the curricular with community-engaged learning courses and research, coursework designed to address community needs and access community knowledge while providing opportunities for real-world hands-on experience. And she assists in fostering new and existing partnerships between Kenyon and the surrounding community. Alyssa's experience with a variety of community stakeholders and community settings, combined with her lifelong passion for literature, gives her a unique perspective on civil discourse and literary advocacy. In her work for Kenyon College and as a PEN Across America co-chair, Alyssa is excited to further support and promote opportunities for community members to engage in debate, participate in advocacy and initiatives, and learn together through literary themed workshops and conversations.
Thank you. And on that note, I will go ahead and go into a few opening comments. So Banned Books Week is an annual event celebrating the freedom to read. Typically held during the last week of September, it spotlights current and historical attempts to censor books in libraries and schools. It brings together the entire book community, librarians, booksellers, publishers, journalists, teachers, and readers of all different types, in shared support of the freedom to seek and to express ideas, even those some consider unorthodox or unpopular. In 2021, the Office for Intellectual Freedom tracked 729 challenges to library, school, and university materials and services. The challenge is basically trying to get a book banned. But that ended up affecting 1,597 books. The office also documented 681 challenges to books through the first 8 months of 2022, involving 1,651 different titles. The office also noted a focus on demand to remove books that addressed racism and racial justice, or those that shared the stories of Black, Indigenous, or people of color. A list of banned and challenge titles can be found on the ALI website, and you will be surprised by what you'll find. So definitely check that out in your free time. We hope that these discussions will help us examine the history of banned books, our current censorious moment, and the path toward a free and enlightened culture. So thank you for coming along with us on that. So a brief summary on Fahrenheit 451, just to remind us. Guy Montag is a fireman. His job is to destroy the most illegal of commodities, the printed book, along with the houses in which they are hidden. Montag never questions the destruction and ruin his actions produce, returning each day to his bland life and wife Mildred, who spends all day with her television family. But when he meets an eccentric young neighbor, Clarice, who introduces him to a past where people didn't live in fear, and to a present where one sees the world through the ideas in books instead of the mindless chatter of television, Montag begins to question everything he has ever known. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with our first question. Debbie, to you.
Thank you, Alyssa. Our first question is, what was true and powerful for you in your reading of the book? What are some themes it suggests? I'll get started with that. For me, I believe that this book was something that I had never encountered before, and I would say that, adding to what has briefly been discussed by Alyssa, what I thought was really powerful was the banning of the books, and how, if you compare with now, how we celebrate books and how we encourage everybody to go to libraries and read, and we magnify books in that aspect. But the fact that this book was kind of discussing something totally opposite for that, I felt like that was something very powerful. And for me, the theme that I think it suggests is just the theme of freedom of speech, having that opportunity to rise up and talk about what you believe is true and what you believe that you need to advocate for is something that's important, despite what other people might think about, and just embracing diversity in the whole aspect of it all. I think for me, that was something that stood out from reading the book. Alyssa?
So Fahrenheit 451 I did encounter it early on, I would say probably around middle school. And I've always been that kid who's constantly reading books, constantly at the library. And when I first came across the idea that there was such a thing as banning books, it was just astonishing to me, right? And just the idea of how much knowledge, how many different worldviews, different perceptions and things that people will miss out on just because they didn't like a swear word, or they didn't approve of message that was different from their own, is just something that's always been kind of utterly baffling to me. So Fahrenheit 451 always stuck with me in that. And I think I also have like what my husband calls an overdeveloped sense of justice. And so whenever I read Fahrenheit 451, or when I reread it, for instance, it made me so full of, I guess, anger that this could be something that would happen, and yet also thinking, wow, this stuff is happening. And just being utterly baffled that, I mean, Ray Bradbury this was happening. I mean, his book was banned on the get-go. And just that it's continuing, and the numbers that I read earlier in the statement, it's wild.
And we have a comment in the chat that I'll share with you. I just gave a heads up to our participants that like we can activate your microphone, but you can't activate it yourself. So you just need to either post in the chat or raise your hand and we'll let you talk. And what McCarty is saying is how views of books are so different. We view books as an escape and a magical thing, while Fahrenheit 451 says they are awful things full of fiction. I'm in middle school right now, and how people view stuff, even teenagers, is insane. And we won't pile on teenagers because we've all been there, right? But I think great comment.
This actually kind of plays into a conversation that I kind of overheard and ended up inserting myself into at our local bookstore, where there was a local middle school librarian who was looking to try out a couple new books to see if the middle school library should have them. And some of the students had recommended this book, and it was a kind of like a sci-fi dystopian future sort of thing, except it didn't come across as dystopian. It was actually very initially utopian until one realized it's dystopian, right? And one of the main, she was concerned about how many swear words were in it. And the bookstore manager at the time, he was like, "You've read this book, Alyssa. Do you remember?" And I was like, honestly, I don't remember the swear words, but I do think I would be more concerned about like all the violence that's in this book. I mean, as it's the audience is for middle schoolers, and I think it's totally fine for middle schoolers. But it just surprised me that that's where the question went. And she actually was like, "Well, I don't have parents that come to me saying I didn't like how violent this book was. I have them coming because there's too many swear words in it and things like that." And that's even stuff, I mean, that book, it's not it's not an escape. It's not a kind of a fun fantasy land. It's kind of grim, right? And I think it doesn't even matter which realm it's in. I think there's always going to be people who aren't fans, I suppose.
Well, and really we could say that about almost anything, right? Like, and I think the big issue is who decides who gets to read Fahrenheit 451 and who doesn't, right? Like, I mean, you can make rules for your own kids in your own house. But I wonder, like, what I wonder about is like, when do we get to make rules for other people about what they read? And that's where I think we get into the slippery slope, right? And so the ethic of like information and access to, I don't know, sort of like intellectual diversity and freedom of thought is such a critical component of library work as I understand it. I mean, I'm not a librarian, so I don't want to overstep my bounds here, but I really admire the tenet of like, you know what, it's there. You can read it if you want to read it. You don't have to read it if it's not your cup of tea.
Yeah, I'm wondering, maybe Janine, you might want to chime in, see if you have something to say about that.
I personally always think that the word banned is has such an interesting connotation, simply because in order to ban something, there must be something inherently wrong or inaccurate about the things that, if it's books or music, the form of media is trying to portray. And to ever say that something is wrong seems just incorrect in general, because nothing is ever wrong. There's just like a lot of different opinions and diversity about what people think and assume.
Yeah, I agree with that. Thank you. And that actually kind of goes right into our next question, which is, what power lies in books?
Ooh, and I wonder, we could have people put that in the chat or in the Q&A, wherever you feel most comfortable posting. I mean, that's a very rich question. There's lots of possibilities there. What power lies in our books? Leah, do you want to stab at that one?
I can try. It's an interesting question. I've met a lot of people that don't like to read. And so I think it's a subjective question. I think it's different for everyone. For me, the book I'm reading can really affect my mood. If I'm reading a book where my favorite character dies, I'll be upset for the rest of the day. And then there are also texts that have carried me to where I am today, and quotes that I tell myself when I'm in a hard spot. So for me personally, books are very powerful. And I think that it's a neutral power. It can be good and bad, depending on how you use it, I guess, is what I have to say about that.
Something that I've always found fascinating is how powerful books are, because they sort of transport you to a different world that you've either never been to before or you cannot afford to travel. For instance, if you're living in one particular country and you're reading about a story that's been set in a setting that's in a different continent, it transports you there from the comfort of your couch or your bed or wherever you are at the beach. I find it to be like this channel that gives you a lot of knowledge, even if you just don't know anything about that setting or the story or anything that's being discussed in the book. Just having that opportunity to sit down with a book, it's not the same as, like now we have Kindle and we have all these electronic resources. It's just not the same, but being able to hold a book in your hand and then reading it, there's something about that gets me really excited. Just being able to see a different world, see the world from the lens of the author, I find that to be so powerful.
We have some really great comments in the chat. I posted Bryce, and Bryce says, books give you the power of knowledge. By reading the books, you can learn more about what the world used to be like and what it might become. How rich with possibility, And Jack says, we can often draw parallels between books and the real world, meaning that books can teach us more about our own society. That gives books the power to teach reality. And with that, I think books have the power to kind of bend and shape reality. If you think about propaganda, one of the reasons propaganda is so effective is because it tugs at your little heartstrings. And this, who decides what that is, right? We can have some great family quarrels over that. Anybody else? All right, Debbie, I think you're up.
Moving to the next question, which is, did you feel any connections between the book and contemporary life? If I could chime in, I would say for me, I did not see much of a connection because it seems like a made up world, which is not what we are currently living in. We live in a world where we prioritize reading. Like for me, who's currently pursuing my doctorate degree, I prioritize books, and there's no way I would encourage books to be banned because I believe there's always somebody who's going to benefit from it. I don't expect everybody to see things in the same lens as I do. So if it does not benefit me, it will benefit somebody else. So I would say, yeah, there's really not much of a connection there. I would like to hear somebody else's opinion, maybe Leah.
We also, before we put Leah on the spot, I want to make sure that we don't lose Joan's post. And she said, I think she's responding to the other question, but it says, books, give us the power to see ourselves and learn about others. I think what is lost in the discussion of banned books is an individual's right to read or not read. And I love that. If you don't like, I don't know, beets, and you go to a restaurant and they have beets on the menu, you don't prohibit someone else from ordering them. What's the big deal? Let people have their beets, let people have their Kafka. It's, to me. But I think that we all too, though, there are so many slippery slopes in this conversation, so keep it coming in the chat and we will continue to facilitate this. And again, feel free to message us if you want to have your microphone activated and talk if typing is more difficult for you, or we can continue this way. So I'll clear room for whomever wants to talk about the connections between Fahrenheit 451 and contemporary life.
I think one of the really interesting things, I mean, this is kind of not quite related to banned books, but is the technology that Ray Bradbury uses in this to kind of show how easy it was for everyone to kind of collectively accept not reading, being, you know, a new way of life, is incredible, because I mean, all this technology is stuff we are definitely seeing today. And it just seems like this interesting pattern that we're just kind of starting to follow. And how do we keep ourselves from going in that direction?
In the chat, McCarthy points out that book bans are insanely high right now, and they think that there's a connection or a definite metaphorical connection between our world and the world of Fahrenheit 451. And I just wanted to add on to that, to this idea of like, not only in literature, but I'm thinking like in media especially, there's a lot of information that goes out and it's not really censored, and a lot of people just assume that that's the correct way to live, to like have all this information kind of thrown at you. And I think it's definitely like going back to the example Jamie brought up of like picking and choosing what you want, because like there's some information that certain people don't want to hear, but you can't tell other people that they also can't wish to know that information. Some people have different levels of like what they're able to interpret versus what they're just not willing to hear.
And we have a comment from Zora saying, but the internet has made banning books a challenge in countries that previously have banned books. And she says in parentheses, I'm thinking of Vietnam. Zora, and I just want to make sure I understand you by that. Do you mean that people can access banned material via the internet that normally, if the print wasn't available, you know, like in the pre-internet times, if the print wasn't available, you couldn't get the book. And now with digital access, that's broadening? Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure I had you, you know, that I represented you properly. And that's interesting too. There's actually a school librarian in Oklahoma who was fired for sharing the link to the Brooklyn Public Library, which provides anyone in the I think you may have to be like a high school student or something, but essentially provides open access to ebooks in a state which has very vigorously banned books in the past school year. So that librarian was trying to provide access and is now, you know, looking at the loss of her teaching license. So those kinds of connections between the book and Fahrenheit 451, right? Like losing your job because if your job is to help people read and you connect them, then what happens, right? Like these are real things that are happening in real time in our society in similar ways that they unfolded in the book. You know, they didn't go burn her house down, but I mean, her livelihood is imperiled by doing the job of providing access. So. And Zora also comments, but also people talk about books in social media, so it's harder to ban books. That may be a way around it. There are countries where social media is banned. Go ahead, Alyssa.
Right. Oh, I was just going to say that I was doing some research on book banning and the efficacy of it. And it turns out that even from, you know, the 1930s, as early as that, book banning has never proved to be particularly efficacious. And I think that's interesting, that even before social media and things like that, it doesn't work, right? It doesn't work because people are still going to want access to these books, and even more so when the access is taken away. But it does make me wonder. I kind of want to skip ahead to a different question. Is that okay if we go out of order? Let me see here. I'm sorry.
We make our own rules, Alyssa.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not going to ban you from reading a question in a discussion about censorship.
So I guess with Fahrenheit 451, who do we see as responsible for the censorship that was going on?
Now I have to get my book out.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I would say, I think because we mostly run so fast and blame the government for everything, sometimes it's not 100% their fault. It's the citizens, the locals also play a part in decision making, key decision making. If you're talking about strategic planning and decision making, in this book, you can see Montag's wife played a role in that censorship. So I would say we do, like as local people, we have a part to play in advocating for some things. And when we keep quiet and we know we're supposed to say something, we are also playing a part in it. So I would say it runs both ways. The authoritarians and also the locals were part of that decision making.
It was kind of fascinating to me how many people were willing to just sell him out for the book,
Yes.
right? And without any real gains for themselves. And I think that's the culture of fear that, you said an important word, which is autocracy, right? And like, I think that that's an important thing for us to think about. We're in the United States, and this is a place where supposedly we are ruled with neither fear nor favor. And like, we have freedoms that we take for granted. So I wonder about, in Bradbury's world, what was I always kind of like felt a sort of disconnect in reading between like, what benefit would there be to turning him in other than some kind of personal satisfaction? Didn't she get a faster car or something? I can't remember now. Shame on me.
I can't remember that detail either, so you shouldn't feel bad. I do agree that it does seem like the people themselves did play a large role in becoming a culture where books are banned. And I think Beatty makes a lot of hinting toward that. I could look in my book and see if I could find specific passages, but he seems to really have a lot to say on the matter of the people wanting it to be that way. But is what Beatty is saying propaganda for his doubtful fireman? Hard to tell. I think maybe we go back to a different question. Is that where we are? Okay, let's go back to a different question.
Yeah, we can explore a different question.
Okay,
Alyssa?
I'll go for it.
Okay.
So 3 chief inspirations Ray Bradbury drew from include Nazi book burnings, Soviet Union ideology repression, and his own experience of being interrogated by a police officer for taking a walk at night. How do these inspirations, separately or together, create a sense of alienation or othering that can serve to divide and conquer people? And how did we see this being utilized in the book?
And participants, again, feel free to let us know if you would like to chime in. We can unmute you with our magical Zoom powers, or you can type things into the chat as you wish. The book burning thing, obviously, like, I don't remember World War II. But I do remember being, alive during the tail end of the Cold War and old enough to have been taught in school about, like the repressive Soviet regime and censorship and things like that, and kind of, coached again and again on how lucky we are to have the freedom to, the freedom to read what we will and to have even cockamamie ideas. You don't necessarily go to jail for that. You might lose some friends, you might weird people out, but you're not locked up for it, And I think that with those inspirations are clearly divisive in the book. I mean, that's what we were just talking about, right? It's like his own wife turns on him, and the horrors of the Soviet regime, as I remember hearing about it in elementary school and junior high, it was like things that it inspired people to turn on each other instead of collaborating together the way we are supposed to in participatory democracy. So it just kind of taking me back here to civics class with this one. Anybody else?
All right, and that would lead us to the next question. What is wrong with having a narrow-minded society? Go ahead, Janine.
I mean, like just in general, being ignorant and narrow-minded is definitely a shortcoming in like how people interact with each other, especially when you consider that a lot of people don't know others' stories, which I feel like a lot of new age authors are trying to like explore more and like tell more just I guess just stories like their own and like their culture's experiences, and however that works out, hopefully we learn to be like more open and communicative with one another, and it's able to share just like our general lives and like how that affects us in the world.
I love that. That just leads me to this point. For me, I write children's books, and primarily children's books that highlight diversity. So I will write about life in Africa, life in a different continent, and I'll talk about Black children and what they do, how they grew up, what they play, things like that. So having a narrow-minded society blocks you from being able to enjoy other people's cultures. You don't get to see a glimpse of how people grew up, how people live, how people interact, and what they embrace. You grow up in a society where all you know is your town, your family, and that's about it. So having the opportunity to read about different people and different continents and where they came from, it opens up a whole new world to you.
Yeah, and if I can jump in, we've got some new messages in the chat I just want to read out. So Jack said, no change can be made in society if everyone is narrow-minded. Therefore, no progress can be made in a society like this. And then after that, we also had Bryce's shared message. To quote Meg Medina, it supports a false idea that there is one version of life that is acceptable, and it denigrates the work of authors who are brave enough to name experiences that are difficult and real.
We also have a great quote, great comment from McCarty, who says, in all caps, which I love, change, double exclamation point. Ignorance is an awful thing, and it can prohibit people from growing and letting them change. Being narrow-minded is a loss to a person and a loss to everyone else as well. And that kind of reminds me of there's a quote attributed to Gandhi, and you know how quotes are, it may not be true, it may not be Gandhi, but he talks about how if you see a man kicking a dog, you should feel bad for the dog and also the man, and I think about the ways that we sometimes, like when we're talking about narrow-minded people, we all think that's someone else, right? Like, how do we know that's not us? And do we, like, finding that empathy, I think, is such a beautiful impulse, McCarty. So I hope that you keep that impulse as you go through middle school, which is, a kind of fire in and of itself. So we're glad to have a lot of young people with us here today. Let me see. Janine, can you do Bryce's comment?
Yeah, for sure. Bryce says, it also teaches the new generations that a one-sided society is okay when it is not. They need to see the knowledge of both sides to see what the world is really like.
And that actually, I kind of want to use that comment to go into one of our next questions. So I'm going to start with a quote from the book. It's Beatty, and he says, "So now do you see why books are hated and feared? They show the pores in the face of life. The comfortable people want only wax moon faces, poreless, hairless, expressionless," end quote. So how does this connect with censorship? And I think we're already touching on that, but how can we dive further into that?
Some of it reminds me of like Instagram filters. Like, what are we presenting to the world to make ourselves look better? Not to do, pull us off in totally the wrong direction, but there is a connection though with technology, right? Like, what is it letting us falsify in ourselves and falsely present to others, like misinformation, disinformation, all the stuff that we are having a lot of conflict over.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And I guess going back to this quote, I just posted it in the chat, so I hope that went through. It's, I guess, also going back to social media a bit, because it can be you can kind of decide what you want to see by following certain people, certain communities and organizations, and you can kind of build an echo chamber around yourself, and you can create your own comfort zone. And I think that books do a really good job of surprising you and taking you out of that comfort zone when you don't expect it. And so that can be really scary. And I think that that's kind of what this quote is getting at, is that fear of the unknown.
Thank you, Leah. I agree with you. One of my favorite banned books is The Diary of Anne Frank. And one of the reasons that it was banned, that you see over and over again, is that, and I quote, "It's a real bummer." And to me, and I think to a lot of people, that is just an unreasonable excuse to ban a book in general, but to also ban a book like that, something that is so important to our history. And even if it was, a fictional piece that still illustrated things that did actually happen to people, it's still something that needs to be heard. It's a story that needs to be told.
We have a quote from Bryce in the comments that says, "People don't want to relive the past, but as painful as it might be, we need the knowledge of the past so that we can move on and live in the future." And then Matt says, "If there is no conversation about subjects, then there is no growth. To discuss is to understand. Understanding is part of learning. Talking about things that bother us or are controversial is how we grow and gain understanding. With the censorship and cancel culture of information and people who say things go on currently today, how far are we from Fahrenheit 51 in the world? How would you suggest we push for more discussion in society?"
Now we've got some great questions, right? So how do we talk about this stuff, right? Or how do we get these conversations moving when we're all in our little silos, right? And our echo chambers, and also when, technology, people are spending more time on screens, right? Was one of the things that really resonated with me about the book, So I wonder, like, do you mind, Debbie and Alyssa, if we talk about that a little bit? Like, what are some ways? Because this is like what the library does. We facilitate discussions. That's how you all wound up here. So, so like, what can we do? Give me some programming ideas, people.
For me, I would say because I'm a mom, so I believe everything starts at home. You encouraging your children to have discussions with their friends and not just to play with friends who look like them, but to open up their world to people who don't look like them, people who they don't understand. It will encourage people to accept things that are different from them. So eventually, as they grow up, they'll learn that it's okay to talk about things that are not comfortable. So it wouldn't be like they're just blocking themselves and having that narrow-minded society view, like what we've discussed. So starting from home, talk to your kids, talk to your relatives, talk to your mother, talk to your father. Start from home. And when you change your family's mind view and you open it up to welcoming other people who don't look like you or they don't live like you, they're different from you, that will in turn melt over and it will boil over and you'll influence other people around you and you'll open up more conversations and change the world.
Jack says, books of history and or politics often get banned due to the fact that they make students uncomfortable. This discomfort comes from the exposure of our ignorance, which is something we really should face head on in order to grow. And absolutely. And I think one of the things that people could do to kind of help face head on, and it's going to take so much time and so much effort, is, you know, going to school board meetings, other school government, well, public schools, more things like that. And as a parent, I mean, it's so hard to be able to fit in these sorts of things, but it's something that comes up all of the time. And I think if people have kids, you know, maybe make that effort to be there, to be this voice who's against, you know, removing this necessary information and these necessary experiences.
You know, it's interesting because the library is a county agency and we also serve a city population. And so I found out some interesting things, right? Like, so if you are wanting to participate and have more conversations, I love the suggestion to talk at home and talk with your family and your extended family and make new friends and to go to your school board meetings. And also because of the pandemic, which had so few good outcomes, right, for so many people. However, lots and lots of meetings are online now. And you don't have to get everybody in the car and get to city council meeting. Sometimes, depending, right, like you can live stream it and you can comment and participate the same way that you're participating here with us in Mount Vernon, Ohio, where no matter where you are, you're here with us, and we are doing this work today. And I'm really grateful to have everyone here being part of that. So it's pretty cool to hear these ideas, and remember to get yourself out there and participate. You know, we all spent a lot of time, many of us, at home, and after the lockdowns and everything, like remembering to be in the outside world and be active in it can be really like a thing, you know. And I see some great comments in the chat, so I'm going to let Janine and Leah read those before we move on.
Yeah, so we have one from Bryce. If kids and students were to speak up about how book banning is creating turmoil over the country and that it is disappointing to lose so many thought-provoking texts, would there be a decline in book bans?
I think that's an interesting question because it calls to this idea that students are, I don't want to phrase this in this way, but I can't really think of any other way to phrase it. But it calls to this idea that students aren't important in the world because there's a lot of like little voices that people tend to not hear or pretend or just be ignorant to. But I think that like an overwhelming number of students can make a change. From varying ages, even if you're in kindergarten, middle school, college, whatever your like age bracket is, I think that if enough people can speak up about an issue, there can be enough like advocacy and like addressing this issue within the community, that it can go further and impact how people respond to us.
And Bryce, I would add to what Janine is saying. In the research that I've done to prepare for Banned Books Week, it's really interesting. There have been actually a relatively large number of students and a decent amount of student representation in several of the higher profile book banning cases. And it didn't always change the outcome, which is really a lesson for us to think about, right? Like, to what degree do students have agency in their own place of education? What degree should they have, right? We can't have, I'm trying to think of a silly example. And of course, no metaphors are coming to mind. Give everybody a free bicycle, right? Like, like, sure, maybe everybody votes for that, right? But it isn't like, that's complicated, right? We can't do that. But when it comes to something like the content of their curriculum or what they're allowed to have access to, we run into one of those slippery slope arguments again, right? So do we go with the all reading is good reading approach that, like, as an English teacher or recovering English teacher, I tend to espouse? There are lots and lots of questions around this. Leah, did we have another chat comment, or am I blurry-eyed here?
We just got two in. Jack says, would stronger student participation in this fight against censorship decrease the amount of banned books in schools? And then right after that, McCarty says, if I could add to Bryce's comment, there are some students who do want to help and that are trying to help, but in my experience, adults often tend to overlook kids and teens and brush them off as they aren't important.
And to that, I say, share the link to the Brooklyn Public Library. Get yourself an ebook. And I mean, the internet is a way that, like, expands and shrinks the world. So let's expand it by providing online access to those books to students who want to read them. All righty. Whew, we are covering a lot of ground here tonight. I think we have time for one more question.
Just super quickly, we also have another comment from Phyllis. Phyllis says, thank you for this conversation. This subject is very important. Here's a link about banned books, and we will post that to everyone so you guys have access to that link. Thank you, Phyllis.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. Thomas King said that when we read and share stories, we walk away different and with knowledge we didn't have when we arrived. Those stories changes. If you felt this in your reading of the book, share with us how reading Fahrenheit 451 changed you. Great question.
I think it was really interesting because I struggle with the depiction of the wife in this book. I think it's really deeply problematic, but that's not what tonight is about, right? So, like, but with all of that, I thought a lot about how there are friends I keep in touch with over Zoom because I've lived all over the country and have family all over the country. And are they my imaginary family? Like, is there too much? Like, I was like, wow, am I doing that thing where, like, the screen is more important to me than, like, going for a walk outside? And it really did get me thinking about some of that. I felt a little bit of, like, egg on my face with the overindulgence in technology piece. I'm not much of a book banner, so so that my needle did not move on that front. But I'd love to hear from everybody else.
I will say I kind of already addressed my first experience in reading Fahrenheit 451, but I do think upon my second read through, I'm so interested in the character of Beatty and what's his story, because he seems so well read. And so this isn't necessarily like a change in my viewpoints, but I really want to know, like, what do other people think about him if we get to that question? Just I just am so curious.
We have an excellent comment actually from McCarthy, who says Fahrenheit 451 was one of the books that really brought banned books to my attention and made me start trying to fight for my intellectual freedom. Thank you. That's very insightful.
Yeah, which is exactly what I was thinking while everyone was talking. Stand for what you believe. Yeah, just leave it there. Stand up for what you believe. If you believe something is right, then fight for it. I mean, not like go to social media and verbally fight with everybody, no, but stick to your ground and stand up for it. You don't have to change just because somebody talks to you, like the neighbor who was trying to influence Montag. You don't have to give in to that influence, but stick to your principles and what you believe is right for you.
And we have a great comment from Leanne, who just joined us. She says, I agree about the wife, but I think if you think of her in time and place, she makes a lot more sense, fits more or something. And I'm willing to say maybe. But I mean, every book is a product of its time, right? And I can't, what year was this written?
1950s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When, like, wives' roles were being very fiercely delineated in post-war United States,
Yeah.
and lots of things happening with the American family. So yeah.
Yep. Like Clarice.
Soap operas are still king.
Right.
Right.
Like,
And
I think Clarice even made a comment about how she would prefer it if children were spanked, because she was, and so and she grew up better than the others, and it was like, oh. But yeah, 1950s, right?
Yeah, there's definitely like going to be there are so many different ways of reading a book, and what I love about them is that they invite you in to be part of that conversation. And the great conversation that we've been able to have tonight, as I'm kind of watching the clock and being mindful of our time, is because we all stepped into a world together to talk about Fahrenheit 451, and to talk about book bans and censorship and what's important to all of us. And I really want to thank everyone for their honesty and their directness, and like their willingness to step through this window into another world with us and to talk through these things. Debbie and Alyssa and Janine and Leah, did you have a quick closing comment before we talk about what else is coming up this week?
I do, just really quickly. I just want to encourage people to find ways to be active in your local government on these smaller levels. Find, like-minded groups that are trying to make change, trying to keep things going in a different direction, where, Ray Bradbury this was a warning, right? It wasn't like this is gonna happen, but it's like this very much could happen. And I think we're still on that track. And I think just getting down on that local level, it does do a lot.
That's so true, Alyssa. And from a public health and author point of view, collaborate. You can never go wrong with that. Find people that you can work with, people who do something different from you. That's how learning advances.
On the topic of student advocacy, I just want to say, just keep being loud. Keep expressing yourself in the way that, whatever way you see fit, if it's creative, if it's logical, whatever way you see fit. Because yeah, it might seem like they're not listening, and sometimes they just aren't. But at some point, something has to change. And the more people you can reach and the more access you have, especially with like social media as a tool, you can reach a lot more people this way, and you can get like a lot more voices interested and activated.
Leah, did you want to chime in? I know you've been busy minding the chat. I don't want to leave you out.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite books. It's a great thing to kind of revisit as I get older. I first read it, I think, when I was in middle school. It's really interesting because my life has changed so much from when I read it, and a lot of things that I thought I was right about, I realize now I was pretty wrong about. And so I guess my piece of advice is to keep challenging yourself. Don't assume that you're as open-minded as you hope to be. I think we can always improve on that. And there is a danger in complacency. So I think that that would be my little tidbit for today.
Thank you, Leah. And thank you, Debbie and Alyssa and Janine, and everyone who's participating with us from all around the country. I'm going to have Leah drop some links into the chat to the ALA advocacy page, to the Banned Books Weeks page, and to connect you directly to the Public Library of Mount Vernon and Knox County. This is our only online event this week, but we have a bunch of stuff coming up in person. So if you are around tomorrow and you are hungry, I ordered like, I don't know, 10 extra sandwiches, come to lunch. We'll be there. And we have a teen event on Wednesday from 4 to 7 with lots of pizza, and we'll all be there, I think. And then on Thursday, we have our big capstone event for the Banned Books Week project, which is going to be at Ariel Foundation Park in the Knox County Foundation Pavilion. So we are really looking forward to hearing from community members who are experts and community members who just want to show up and have these kinds of conversations. One of the coolest thing about working in the library is that you get to talk with people all the time. And I really love the idea of us all challenging each other to continue to grow and to continue to find ways that we can meet in the middle, or, you know, wherever it is we wind up through consensus to solve and address the big questions that are thriving in our homes, our democracies, and our lives. So I want to thank everybody, especially William and Sabrina from Penn America, who absolutely rock. And big shout out to our co-chairs, Debbie and Alyssa, and go to www.knox.net. Everybody have a great night. Thank you.